He was 11. He didn't know what it meant to be in power, but he knew what it meant to be alone. He didn't remember his father. He had gone to war and returned in a coffin. His mother lay in a tomb without a face. Plague leaves no faces. He remained, alone, with a crown he hadn't chosen. The cathedral was cold. It smelled of wax, stone, and dust. Hundreds of eyes, mosaic, stone, human, watched him while the old archbishop with trembling hands lifted the heavy crown, gold that made the child's neck ache, and not only his neck. Conrad stood as he had been taught, straight, restrained. Only his fingers trembled. He didn't know exactly what was happening, but he felt they were placing him not on a throne, on an altar. He looked around, searching for one face, one single face. Not the soldiers, not the officials, not the monks. His aunt, Agnes, the one who read him psalms when he couldn't sleep at night. The one who stroked his hair and said, "You don't need to be strong every day." She wasn't there. Conrad didn't know that she was in another room, sitting with papers on her lap, unable to sign, because she understood this boy, whose forehead she had pressed against hers during fever days, would become her husband, not by fault, by order. The contract was already being written. Nearby, dukes, canons, the chancellor. Their faces were calm. For them, it was calculation. The boy's body, a guarantee of dynasty. The woman's body, a vessel for blood that wouldn't scatter to dust. Conrad felt a chill run down his spine. Someone had placed the crown. He didn't understand when. He felt the weight. Too early, too heavy. Like a helmet, without the shoulders to bear it. He looked up, seeking a gaze, hers, but met only the ceiling, inscribed with Latin, Gloria in excelsis, glory in the highest. But he wanted glory below, in the room, in a palm that doesn't tremble. Conrad didn't know that he hadn't become a king. He had become a hostage. On this very day his destruction began, not from a sword, from paper, from a seal, from a crown that fell not on his head, but on his childhood, and in the neighboring room Agnes looked out the window and whispered, "Forgive me, my boy," while behind her back the lines of the marriage contract were already drying. Chapter 2. The Woman Who Must Not Be Touched. She entered his life as light enters through stained glass, quietly, uninvited, enveloping, not foreign but not her own, not a mother and not a woman. Agnes, sister of his fallen father, the one who had worn mourning for more than one man, and perhaps not for him but for herself. She was 34, an age when women in her position were long since either in a monastery or in a political marriage, but she remained at court, as if fate hesitated with a final decision. She lived in the north wing of the castle, among daisies and Latin books, always in gray or white. No gold, no veils, long sleeves that hid her wrists. When Conrad was deprived of his mother, she approached him first. Not in the palace, in the library. He sat pressed into a corner holding a tome that was beyond his age. She didn't ask, "Why are you crying?" Didn't say, "I'll help." She sat beside him, and after a few minutes he laid his head on her knees. Then she first understood. This child looks at her differently, not with submission, with faith. Months passed. She sewed him nightshirts, herself, secretly, hiding them in her chambers. She brought him herbs for headaches, held his hand when he cried in his sleep. He called her my Agnes, not aunt, not lady, not countess, my, and in this word was something that frightened her, because it sounded not childish, as if he knew. One night, during a downpour, he knocked at her door. He was in a thin shirt, barefoot, shivering. She let him in. He said nothing. Lay down beside her, like in childhood, buried his nose in her shoulder. After some time his breathing became even, and she lay, not breathing, because she felt how his palm lightly touched her hand, not accidentally, not infantilely, and in this touch there was no sin, but there was a warning. The next day she ordered servants to nail a bolt on the inside of the door, not because she feared him, because she feared herself. She saw how he was changing, how his shoulders became sharper, how metal broke through in his voice. He no longer looked like a boy, no longer laughed aloud, already knew how to be silent. And when she heard behind the door how he sang a prayer alone, without faltering, she became cold. He sat beside her more and more often, told her how he dreamed of her, not as a mother, but as a star, bright and unattainable, and she smiled, through force. The smile hurt inside, like a bruise. She stroked his hair, said, "This will pass." But inside she knew it won't pass, because she herself didn't want it to pass, because his gaze was the only one in this palace where there was no lust, no calculation, no game, only faith. She hid in the chapel more and more often, looked into his eyes less and less, and understood more and more clearly. She was the one who must not be touched. But he didn't know this, and every day he came closer, one step closer, to the edge from which she had long been looking down. Chapter 3. Letter to the Pope and Silence in Response. The night when she wrote the letter was moonless. The window was thrown open, wind burst into the room, tore pages, extinguished the candle. But Agnes didn't notice. Ink dripped from the quill like blood. Her hand trembled. Each word came like a gulp under water. Sanctissimus Pater, so the letter began, too official, too polite for what she wanted to say. She wrote it 3 times. The first time, dryly, like a politician. The second with plea. The third with pain that a noble woman shouldn't have. In the last version were lines, "He is a child. I am his aunt. If this is marriage, then where is the sin? If this is not sin, then why does it hurt me to breathe?" She knew that the Pope wouldn't read the letter himself. A notary would open it, file it in a list of petitions, and filter it by importance. But she had no other way out, because the wedding was scheduled. The council at court decreed, the Hohenstaufens cannot wait. Pretenders multiplied, blood degenerated. To preserve the dynasty, 2 bodies must be joined, even if one is still almost a child and the other almost in the grave from internal rot. "You will be his salvation, Agnes," said the chancellor. "And who will save me?" she wanted to ask, but remained silent. Conrad didn't know what was happening. He saw only how she became quieter, how she no longer laughed, no longer sang, how her lips were perpetually dry. He thought, this is from fatigue, and she knew this is from approaching, because time ran not forward to the wedding date. She sat in the chapel with the letter in her hands when they took him to Regensburg to prepare for the ceremony. He was given new clothes, began to be taught Latin wedding vows. He wrote her short notes. "I'm afraid, but if you're with me, I'm not scared." She reread them again and again, like notes from a dying man. The answer from Rome came on the 6th day. Thin parchment, official stamp, 1 paragraph. In connection with circumstances of a political nature, the question is recognized as outside priority consideration. Dispensation will not be issued. Interference in the ceremony. Inexpedient to discuss. That was all. Neither yes nor no. Silence with a signature. She sat on the edge of her bed. The letter lay on her knees. Her eyes didn't blink. Veins on her hands swelled. And at this moment she understood. Now everything was inside her, and only inside. The Pope wouldn't save, God was silent, the empire waited. And the wedding approached like an execution, without a sentence, without defense, without the right not to love.
Chapter 4. Kiss on the forehead and blow to the heart. The garden where she wept was laid out during her grandmother's time, old roses climbing the stone with fallen petals, like memory of something beautiful that would never return. There it smelled of damp earth, pond slime, and sharp incense drifting from the monastery chapel. She went there in white, with lowered head, as if not a bride, a corpse on the eve of funeral service. But that was later. Before that was he, Conrad, in the doorway of her chambers. In his hands, a ring, made of wood, unpainted, crooked. Apparently he carved it himself. He held it as if it were the imperial seal. "I'm marrying you so you won't cry," he said quietly.
You cry often when you think I don't see. Agnes froze, first from tenderness, then from horror, because he spoke this not as a child, but as a person who wants to protect, who believes he's capable of saving. He came closer, stood on tiptoes, touched her forehead with his lips, awkwardly, childishly. But in this kiss there was no game. In it was intention, warmth that made her head spin. She didn't recoil, not immediately. She only lowered her eyelids, and something sharp rolled through her head. This has begun. This is no longer mother and son. This is something else. He left, satisfied, ran away, as if he had done a great deed, as if he had saved her from something terrible. And only then did she feel that breath stuck in her chest, and she ran, not to the balcony, not to her chambers, to the garden. There, in the depths, by a stone bench, she fell to her knees, didn't cry, sobbed, strangled, almost soundlessly, as if crying wasn't permitted to her, as if each tear was a crime. Because she understood this was her fault, not his. He doesn't understand. He's a child whom she taught trust, to whom she gave warmth, and now he wants to return it, double it, make it forever. But at what price? She had embraced him when he couldn't sleep from fever. She whispered him fairy tales when he asked to forget his father. She stroked his fingers so he would know he's not alone. But now these fingers hold a ring, and in their touch, adulthood. Premature adulthood. Cruel. In the evening she didn't come to dinner, locked herself in her chambers, didn't answer knocking. Servants whispered that she had fever, but the truth was different. She stood by the mirror for a long time, silent, and didn't see herself in the reflection. Only a question, who are you? A woman who is loved, or a woman who must not be loved? Late at night, she lit a candle, sat at the table. Before her that very ring. He had left it on the window-sill. It was warm from the sun, and still bore the imprint of his palm. She touched it, and felt how her heart painfully contracted, dully, as if someone inside had raised a hammer and was beating on her chest. Kiss on the forehead, ring on the windowsill, a boy with eyes that held more love than in an entire dynasty, and she understood. What she had feared had already happened. He loves her, and she no longer knows if she's a mother or a sinner. And the next day they ordered her to choose fabric for the wedding dress. White, like a shroud. Chapter 5. Dynasty Against God. The council gathered in the gray hall, where even the stone columns seemed tired. Candelabra smoked. Wine didn't flow, ink flowed. Papers rustled faster than leaves in the monastery garden. Everyone understood. The empire was collapsing. The earth groaned under the weight of surnames. And one surname, the last like a dead torch, still glowed. Hohenstaufen. "We have no time for shame," said the chancellor. "Only for blood." "She's his aunt," objected the bishop. "This is incest." "This is a union. You call sin what can preserve the throne. They fear the child's body, not the spirit of the empire. So it was recorded in the protocol. The body is temporary. Dynasty is eternal. Agnes wasn't present at the council. She wasn't invited. Women, not participants in decisions. Only their flesh, an object for seals. She sat in her chambers, in that same room that now smelled not of daisies, but of damp paper and candle wax. She no longer ate. Her lips became dry as parchment. Veins, blue threads under the skin. Sleep disappeared. Faith crumbled. She tried to pray, but even God was silent. Conrad came every evening, sat by her bed, took out the psalter she had given him. "Today I'll read about David," he would say. "He too was young, but God chose him." He read, slowly, pronouncing each word, proud that he could. And she was silent, blinked, sometimes smiled. Inside was hollow. He held her hand, not knowing that her fingers were already colder than stone. He thought she was tired, that the wedding frightened, like any change, that everything would work out. And she looked at the wall and knew. He doesn't understand. He shouldn't understand. Because if he realizes what they're doing to him, he'll perish. And she was already perishing. Drop by drop, finger by finger, eye by eye. At night, she heard how her name was pronounced in the corridor, without tenderness, without meaning. "Agnes will give consent. Where will she go? She understands everything. She's lucky. Anyone could be in her place." And she remembered how she held him, small, with fever. How he pressed against her like a kitten. Now he looked at her like a groom, innocent, faithful, believing. And this killed stronger than church condemnation. On the 5th day, without food, she fell in the chapel, face down. A servant helped her rise. "Rest, milady," he said. "I'm not tired," she whispered. "I'm melting away." Conrad read Psalms. His voice rang like a bell on a lump of ice. "He will strengthen your bones." And she thought, What bones? They're already crumbling. On the 6th day, she asked for wine without bread. The servant was frightened. "The fast will end on Saturday, milady." "I'm not observing a fast. I'm awaiting a verdict." In the evening, Conrad lay beside her, didn't embrace, lay down, and said, "If you don't want to, I'll cancel everything." She stroked his hair and whispered, "You can't cancel anything. You're already a verdict. Not by fault, by blood." And behind the walls of the room, people in furs gathered again and wrote speeches for the wedding, where the word love sounded less often than the word heritage. So dynasty fought with God and won, while Agnes began losing with her body, quietly, slowly, without screaming. As those die who dare not say aloud, "I'm no longer a woman. I'm a sacrifice." Chapter 6. He grows up too fast. When his voice broke, she didn't understand immediately. One evening, when he read another psalm by her bed, the word mercy sounded lower than usual, deeper, as if someone inside him had become older than he himself. He read, smiled, and didn't notice, and she looked away. From that day, everything began to change, irreversibly, not by days, by eyes. He stretched out, his hands roughened, his shoulders became sharp, like his father's, the very one he didn't know. Features of the family appeared in him, the one they now expected him to save. He developed a gaze, direct, heavy, not a boy's gaze and not a man's. The gaze of one who understood there's no way out, but one cannot retreat. He no longer asked, he decided. He no longer reached for her. He approached close, silently. He no longer held her hand. He placed his over it, as if protecting. And precisely in this protection was what broke her inside. She could no longer hide behind familiar roles. Couldn't be an aunt to him. Couldn't be comfort, a book, a pillow. Because he didn't look at her like air. He looked like at a woman. And this was frightening. He began to be silent, long, heavily, spoke only on business, came and didn't ask questions, looked, as if a war was going on inside him, and words interfered. She tried to smile, tried to behave as before. "Did you bring me daisies?" "Not anymore," he answered once. "I'm not a child." And in his voice sounded, "You're not a mother either." She wanted to scream, ask him, not to hurry, not to grow up, not to become this new person. But he already had. He had lips that remembered the kiss on her forehead, fingers that held the ring, and silence instead of questions. Agnes felt, he's not angry, he's not offended, he's waiting, like a person who was promised something, but everything keeps getting delayed. He saw everything, her pale face, blue circles under her eyes, weak voice, but he thought this was fear. That she was afraid of intimacy, and she feared that he wasn't afraid. One evening, he approached her closer than usual. "If you don't want to, I can refuse." "Refuse what?" she asked. He didn't answer. He looked, the way no one had ever looked at her. Not a husband, not a servant, not the Lord, only he. Like at the center of the world, which cannot be obtained, but can be protected. And she understood, this isn't love. This is worse. This is faith. He believed that she needed him, that their union, not a curse, but a sacrifice, that he was her man, and that he had already grown up. She withdrew, closed herself off, was silent, and he too. And this silence beat against the room, against the air, against the heart, stronger than any screams. Because in this silence lived determination. He waited. She trembled. And each day between them became shorter, until the date, until the wedding, until the end. Chapter 7. Week before the wedding. When she was no longer in the hall, no one worried. Agnes always disappeared. To gardens, to chapel, to library, where no one eavesdropped. She knew how to dissolve, to be present in corridors like a scent, gently, quietly, with a shade of anxiety. But on the third day of her absence, even the stone faces on the tapestries seemed worried. They found her by the window opening. In the monastery wing, where they hadn't heated for a long time, she lay, like a figure on a tombstone, hands folded, eyes half closed, lips pale, like an unfinished prayer. On her cheek, a dried drop, unclear, tear or moisture from the wall. A servant called the doctor. The doctor silently examined her, put fingers to her neck, then to her wrist, and only said, "The body is whole, but the soul is leaving." He didn't know how else to describe what he saw. Lungs working, heart beating, but inside, emptiness, as if something important had disappeared and wouldn't return. Agnes was silent. Spoke only briefly, with lips only, "Don't touch me," pushed away food, didn't drink water, didn't answer questions. Even her own name didn't pronounce. Conrad was told she had fallen ill. He came in a new doublet with combed hair. He was preparing for the wedding like preparing for battle, with dignity, with faith. He didn't know why he was needed in this room, but knew he should be nearby. "Am I to blame?" he asked. "Did I do something wrong?" She didn't answer, looked slowly. And in this gaze was everything: tenderness, pain, fear, farewell. He read her psalms, long, carefully, about those who suffered and were heard. She closed her eyes. On the fourth day, he came again, fell to his knees. "Agnes, you always told me the truth. Tell me now, too. Why are you silent?" She moved her lips, barely, and whispered, "My boy shouldn't become my husband." These were the first words in 4 days, and the last in his presence. He went out to the corridor and didn't cry. Pressed against the wall, because in those 8 words was more than in 1,000 vows. She knew, he understood, and in the room she remained lying, weightless, like air, without food, without sound, without pain, only with one gaze directed to the ceiling, where once there were paintings and now only a crack, like in herself, invisible, but deadly. A week remained until the wedding, and in Agnes's body a countdown was already going. Not wedding, funeral. Chapter 8. Forgive me, Conrad. The night was dark not only outside the window. Even candles burned reluctantly, as if afraid to illuminate what shouldn't be seen. The air in the chambers was dense, like a prayer stuck in the throat. Doctors had left, servants too. Only two remained. She, almost transparent. He, no longer a boy. Conrad sat nearby, not as a child by an adult's bed, but as a man by the death of one he loved. He didn't cry, didn't move, held her hand, light as a feather, cold as marble by a tomb. Agnes lay on her back, eyes half open, pupils unfocused. She seemed to look not at him, through him, to that place where goes what cannot be explained. He held her palm as he would hold a shard of glass, with caution, with fear that it would hurt not only her, but him too. "I hear you," he said finally, "even if you're silent." She turned her head, slowly, with effort. "You shouldn't have been here," she whispered. "I shouldn't be anywhere except beside you," he answered. Pause. Long, heavy. "I wanted to protect you," she breathed out. "When you were little, I thought I could be your wall, shield, shadow. And then I became what you needed to be saved from." He squeezed her palm tighter, but didn't answer. He didn't know how, because she was speaking about what they hadn't touched, aloud. About that boundary which they both had crossed, each in their own way, each without evil intent, and found themselves in a trap, without guilt, but with a sentence. "You're not to blame," she said, almost soundlessly. "You loved, and I allowed it. I permitted you to believe that I was yours." He looked at her, and something broke in his chest. Not his heart, it had been cracking for a long time. What held the light in him broke. "I didn't know this was sin," he said quietly. "I thought love was salvation." "Sometimes," she said, "love is a knife, sharp, beautiful, and too personal." Silence descended between them again, but now it held not tension, farewell. "Forgive me, Conrad," she said finally, "for not being able to save you from myself." He wanted to say, "I forgive," but words stuck. He was too young to let go, and too adult not to understand that this was farewell. He stood, carefully, covered her with a blanket, though he knew she was no longer cold, kissed her forehead the last time, and left. Not to the corridor, to adulthood. And she remained, a weak silhouette on the pillow. Her lips moved, but no one heard any more. Probably she repeated again, "Forgive." But now even God, it seemed, didn't want to listen. Chapter 9. The Marriage That Will Not Be. The cathedral was decorated as for a celebration. White fabrics on columns, gold on the altar, laurels by the doors. Bells rang for the first time in long months, loudly, with dignity. They called to a wedding, to a union, to new hope for the empire. They didn't know they were ringing for a funeral. Conrad entered the temple first, in black, not in a wedding doublet, but in a mourning cloak. On him was neither coat of arms, nor brooch, nor sword, only a straight back and motionless face. In the center of the cathedral stood a coffin, long, narrow, upholstered in light fabric. On the lid, a wreath of daisies, the same ones he once brought her to the garden, the same ones from which she once smiled. People didn't understand, whispered. Someone turned to the bishop, someone to the chancellor, but all were silent. Even the priest faltered from the beginning of the prayer, because there was no bride, only a body, fragile, silent, forever separated from name and duty. He approached the coffin, silently, without a nod, without a cross, looked at the wreath, touched a daisy, carefully, as if afraid to destroy it. Then turned, stood before everyone, before officials, before bishops, before those who waited for him to speak according to a written scenario, and said, "I will not be king." In one voice, clearly, without pathos, without hesitation. Silence fell on the temple like a shroud. "I will not be a husband chosen instead of a person. I will not be a continuation of a name that killed her. I will not be a crown if the price is death." He looked into the bishop's face. He lowered his eyes, looked at the chancellor. He clenched his fist, looked into the emptiness between them, where once there had been meaning, and saw nothing. He turned around, slowly, walked to the doors. Alone. No guards. No servants. No words. He walked as if leaving his body, as if leaving not only the palace, title, power, but himself, that boy who believed in Agnes, and that woman who couldn't choose herself instead of the empire. The bells continued to ring. They didn't know the wedding was cancelled, that the dynasty had ended, that no one else would come. Only he and his silence, which sounded louder than all speeches and became history. Chapter 10. The Last Candle of the Hohenstaufens. In the morning, after the wedding that didn't happen, he was seen once more, in a black cloak, on foot, on the road to the monastery of St. Otma, without guards, without signs of power, only steps, stubborn and even, like heartbeats that had decided no longer to beat for a throne. He warned no one, left no letters, demanded no forgiveness. He disappeared from the map of the world, the one where empires draw heirs, and the church crowns not for love, but for necessity. He chose another map, the map of silence. The monks at first didn't understand who he was. A youth, pale, withered, with a face as if carved from sorrow. He himself submitted the request, submitted silently, with a bow, and indicated the name, Conrad. Without titles, without numbers, without surname, as if he wanted to be forgotten immediately. At dawn he entered the refectory, took scissors, and cut his hair, unevenly, too short, as if he wanted not renewal, but deliverance. He looked at the strands falling on the stone floor and thought, "This is all that remains of me." He worked in the garden, washed floors, read psalms in chant. He didn't speak about himself, didn't mention father, mother, Agnes. He was, like a candle in the corner of a chapel, burned quietly. Years passed. In the empire, rulers changed again. One ruled 3 years, another 7. Then came war, then peace, then again blood. The name Hohenstaufen gradually disappeared from speeches. It wasn't written into genealogies. wasn't drawn on engravings. Only in one abbey book remained a short entry.
A youth came, asked about nothing, didn't complain, prayed daily, only for one soul, a woman named Agnes, didn't give his name, but once in the garden to a young novice's question about who he was answered, I am the last of a family that burned from too great love.
He died in silence, without confession, without noise.
His body was washed, wrapped in cloth, buried by the maple where he loved to sit. Over the grave they didn't place a headstone, stuck a wooden cross in the earth. On it, nothing. No date, no word. Once someone placed a wreath of daisies on that cross, and no one came anymore.
A century later in the monastery, they found that scrap of paper, left by the hand of an old abbot, yellowed, barely distinguishable. He never spoke of war, he prayed, for a woman called Agnes. And this was all that remained of the last of the Hohenstaufens. A boy who became a groom who became a shadow, and a shadow who became a prayer.